In the early 1970s, a chemist and inventor by the name of James Lovelock was asked by NASA to create a model for predicting whether there was life on other planets. As he began looking at Mars and Venus, he found in the makeup of their atmospheres there were telltale signs of being incompatible with life. He compared it to our atmosphere here on Earth. The dynamic changes that occur in our atmosphere struck him as the obvious marker for life, and in recognizing this, he had the epiphany that would become known as the Gaia hypothesis. Named, of course, for the Greek goddess of the earth, Gaia, this hypothesis, now considered a theory by many, is the idea that the planet is a living system with living organisms interacting with non-living materials, and in doing so, self-regulating and sustaining the conditions that promote life. In its early conception, this hypothesis included the idea that the Earth was a living entity all on her own, rather than a non-living planet housing living systems. This concept at the time, and by many today, was objected to and dismissed, argued against, and reduced to being some metaphysical New Age concept. Gaia theory is now studied in academic settings across the globe, and Lovelock, now 101, is a revered and award-winning scientist who articulated a concept that has influenced various fields of science and environmentalism. According to Lovelock, what makes our planet different from Mars or Venus is simply that in Earth's planetary evolution, we were headed in the same direction as Venus and Mars when, at the perfect moment, life evolved, and in doing so, began a self-sustaining feedback loop of checks and balances between living organisms and inorganic matter that has maintained itself over the course of billions of years. This feedback system is operated unconsciously by all living organisms on this planet, which regulates the Earth's surface temperature, atmosphere composition, and oceanic salinity. Gaia theory is not the first to recognize planetary homeostasis, but the Gaia hypothesis in its original form, Wikipedia explains, quote, relies on the assessment that such homeostatic balance is actively pursued with the goal of keeping the optimal conditions for life, even when terrestrial or external events menace them, end quote. Actively pursued. Some sources say there's growing evidence to suggest this might be true, while others continue to argue against it. Whether accurate or not, the concept has pushed research in both directions and has at least become a way of perceiving the planet. Since the 1970s, Lovelock has shifted some of his perspective, abandoning portions of the hypothesis in favor of others. And whether we view the Earth as a living system, its own entity with feedback loops that purposely maintain livability on the planet, or as a diverse ecosystem ruled by natural selection with no intentional homeostasis required, there is a word that sums up Gaia theory or hypothesis: interdependence. In article after article, I read about the interdependence and interconnectedness that Lovelock described, because one thing cannot exist without another, which also cannot exist without the next thing, and so on. Earth is truly made up of billions of beings, all existing on the interdependent web that we UU celebrate in our 7th principle. I do think there is value in seeing the Earth as her own entity, and while humans have really big brains and are pretty darn smart, my take on it is that it's a little like a single living cell on the surface of a human body, deciding that there's no overall living entity beneath it. Within our bodies, we have our own systems and feedback loops to maintain homeostasis, but we're not conscious of this happening. We're not conscious of the life that exists in our gut, the foreign beings that make up our microbiome and support or degrade our immune systems, brain chemistry, and digestion. So why would it be fair to say that because we cannot perceive the consciousness of the Earth, that it must not be? The cells in our gut and on our skin are not conscious of our consciousness, yet we are conscious nonetheless. So it may be with Gaia, Mother Earth, and our belief or knowledge of the planet being her own living entity is not required for it to be true or for the potential of the truth to exist. But if we did have that knowledge, if we could say by our current scientific standards that Earth is alive in her own right, not simply a vehicle upon which life has emerged in a solar system that appears otherwise devoid of life, would it change the choices we make? Would it curb our abuse of nature, our pillaging of resources? If we looked out at the world and saw a living, breathing, feeling being beneath our feet, one who cradles us and houses us and endures us, would we stop the abuse and begin differently? Western colonists brought with them entitlement to this land, superiority and greed that continue to justify stripping the earth of habitat. It continues to justify disruption of ecosystems and destruction of species. We live and breathe that entitlement with every purchase we make and every plastic bag we bring home. But the responsibility doesn't solely rest on the consumer. Industry and government alike drag their feet in making change that would slow carbon emissions and reduce habitat destruction. In contrast, native and earth-based wisdom, the sixth source among the 6 UU sources of wisdom and beliefs, often personifies the planet as our mother, a caring parent who holds us gently as we ride with her through space and time. Big Thunder Wabanaki, an Algonquin native, said, "The Great Spirit is our father, but the earth is our mother. She nourishes us. That which we put into the ground, she returns to us." Contemporary earth-based movements continue the tradition of revering Mother Earth. Tom B.K. Goldtooth, executive director of the Indigenous Environmental Network, says, quote, "Working for environmental and economic justice is spiritual work that reaffirms our human relationship and responsibility to protect the sacredness of Mother Earth and the recognition of Father Sky. The modern world cannot achieve economic sustainability without environmental justice and without strong environmental ethics that recognize our human relationship to the sacredness of Mother Earth." The message of deep ecology and holistic environmentalism mirror these thoughts. We cannot see ourselves as separate from the earth. Seeing ourselves as separate is what allowed for the entitlement that got us here in the first place. Modern pagan and environmentalist Starhawk says, quote, "A society that could heal the dismembered world would recognize the inherent value of each person and of the planet, animal, and elemental life that makes up the Earth's living being. It would offer real protection, encourage free expression, and reestablish an ecological balance to be biologically and economically sustainable. Its underlying metaphor would be mystery, the sense of wonder at all that is beyond us and around us, at the forces that sustain our lives and the intricate complexity and beauty of their dance." Whether we view the Gaia hypothesis as a metaphor or embrace the potential underlying spiritual implication of it, the Earth and the living systems on this planet would benefit from us all adopting the idea that Gaia is indeed our mother, a being we should tread gently upon. Her children, the plants and animals, our sisters and brothers, are beings that deserve our care, discipline, and sacrifice. Some have considered the Gaia hypothesis a confirmation that the Earth will right itself despite the violent disruption on the climate that modern human existence has created. James Lovelock disagrees. In his best-selling book, The Revenge of Gaia, Lovelock argued that humans have exploited Earth and the old lady would eliminate us unless we treated her with greater reverence. It is very likely Mother Earth will survive us and our tirade of carbon emissions, but we might take our own species down and bring down a majority of others with us. The danger of viewing ourselves as separate from nature cannot be understated. We are disrupting the homeostasis of the earth, the systems keeping the world in balance. And if those living systems do have an innate intentional balance to them, surely they will force an overcompensation to correct the imbalance. And we are the imbalance. But what if we could become our own system's balance? What if our innovation could become the checks and balances that the planet needs? The pandemic has brought back plastic bags out of necessity, but the pandemic has also brought back gardening and hiking and meeting outdoors or on Zoom, driving a whole lot less. And we don't need a pandemic to shift us into environmental thinking. We just need to look at the planet as a whole system, a living, breathing superorganism that needs our reverence and help. We just need to look at nature without entitlement and remember that our first UU principle, the inherent worth and dignity of all, extends to our brothers and sisters of different species. We are children of this earth, a small part of the interdependent web, but with a heavy footprint. We do have the power to lighten the load on the planet and all the living organisms and non-living matter that share this place with us. If we just consider that this planet, either in metaphor or in reality, is our one and only Mother Earth.